The chandeliers glittered above me, casting golden light over a ballroom filled with elegance and wealth. Charlotte, North Carolina, had never seen a wedding as grand as this. Silk gowns swept across polished marble floors, laughter echoed like crystal bells, and champagne flowed as if the river itself had turned to sparkling wine. But in the middle of that splendor, I stood frozen, an unwelcome shadow in a world of polished perfection. My name is Eleanor Baines, though most call me Ellie. I am 66 years old. That night, I was only supposed to be the mother of the bride, offering my blessings with a modest gift wrapped in cheap paper, yet fate had written a different script. As my daughter Jasmine, dressed in ivory lace, radiant in her beauty, raised her glass, her words pierced me deeper than any knife. "That's the fat S we have to put up with." Her voice rang loud enough for 200 guests to hear, my own daughter, on her wedding day. A cruel wave of laughter swept through the crowd. I felt it strike me from every direction, sneers curling on lips, eyes narrowing with disgust. It was as if I had trespassed into a forbidden kingdom where only the flawless were welcome, and I, awkward, overweight, poor, was an intruder who had no right to breathe the same air. My cheeks burned with shame. My hands trembled as they clutched the small box I had prepared with such tenderness. A silver bracelet, simple but meaningful. Suddenly, in this glittering room, even that gift seemed laughable, like a child's trinket compared to the diamonds flashing on every wrist and neck. I wanted the floor to open and swallow me whole. I wanted to disappear. But just as the laughter reached its cruelest height, something unexpected happened. At the head of the table, a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit stopped laughing. His expression froze, his eyes locked onto mine as if he had seen a ghost. This man was Mr. Sterling, the groom's father. Powerful, respected, the kind of man whose handshake could determine the fate of hundreds. He leaned forward, whispering words no one else seemed to hear. "Wait, aren't you my new boss?" And in that single moment, everything began to change. The ballroom's cruel laughter still echoed in my ears, but Mr. Sterling's voice had shifted the air. While others smirked and sneered, his gaze lingered on me with something startling recognition, the kind that makes the heart stumble. I tightened my grip on the small box in my hands and lowered my eyes, praying no one else had heard him. But in truth, I knew the storm had only just begun. "Let me step back, so you can understand how I came to stand in that gilded hall, shamed by my own child, and yet holding a secret that could dismantle their perfect world. My husband died in a tragic accident when Jasmine was barely 12. Overnight, life became a battlefield. Bills piled high like insurmountable mountains, and every day felt like a war I was losing. I cleaned offices before dawn, rode 3 different bus lines to reach those silent glass towers downtown, and scrubbed until my hands smelled perpetually of bleach and industrial cleaner. To Jasmine, my work was a mark of disgrace. She hated my worn-out shoes squeaking across marble lobbies, despised the way my uniform smelled of chemicals, and turned her face away when classmates asked what her mother did for a living. She grew up ashamed of me. To her, I was a failure, an embarrassment to hide. But what she never knew, what no one suspected, was that while I bent over corporate floors with my mop, I was also listening. I listened when executives worked late, when their careless voices spilled secrets across polished desks. I memorized numbers, names, deals whispered behind half-closed doors. I began to piece together their world, one stock tip here, one overheard conversation there. With trembling hands, I invested my first $50 in a company they spoke of as if it were doomed. That 50 became 100, then 1,000. At night, after Jasmine fell asleep, I studied dog-eared finance books I salvaged from recycling bins. I scribbled calculations on scraps of paper and read until my vision blurred. For decades, while the world saw only a weary cleaning woman, I was quietly building something else, an empire of silence, properties in forgotten corners of the city, shares in companies everyone else had abandoned, small, calculated risks that bloomed into fortunes. I ate simple meals, wore second-hand clothes, and continued to live in my modest 2-bedroom apartment. Outwardly, nothing changed. But behind the locked door of my tiny home, bank statements told a different story, one that would rival the very fortunes of the people who mocked me. And now, in the dazzling glow of my daughter's wedding, my years of invisibility had collided with the glittering arrogance of her new family. Mr. Sterling's eyes, once full of ridicule, now trembled with shock. He had realized the truth, because just 2 weeks before that night, I had signed papers under a name no one connected to me, E.J. Beaumont, and with that name, I had bought Sterling Corporation for $45 million. The very empire Jasmine had married into now unknowingly belonged to the woman she had just humiliated in front of 200 witnesses. And for the first time in 30 years, I felt the stirrings of power. The laughter around me faltered not all at once, but like a ripple spreading across still water. At first, only Mr. Sterling's expression betrayed the shift. His sharp, distinguished features had gone pale, his confident smirk replaced by disbelief. Then, as guests noticed his stillness, their curiosity silenced their cruel amusement. One by one, heads turned toward us. I could almost hear the question forming in their minds. Why was the father of the groom staring at this pitiful old woman as though she held his fate in her hands? My heart pounded so loudly I feared it might echo through the marble hall. Jasmine, radiant in her gown, still smiled cruelly at the humiliation she had orchestrated. She leaned into her friends, whispering jokes at my expense. But as she caught sight of her father-in-law's stricken face, her laughter faltered. "Ma'am?" Mr. Sterling's voice trembled, barely audible above the murmurs of the crowd. He stepped closer, his shoes clicking softly on the marble floor. "Is that you?" He reached into his pocket, fumbling with his phone. His hands shook as he scrolled through emails, photos, contracts, searching, desperate to confirm what his memory screamed at him. I saw it in his eyes. The video calls where my camera had been dark but my voice firm, the contracts signed with my alias, the sealed deals that had saved his crumbling empire. Piece by piece, the puzzle completed itself before him. "My God," he whispered, his voice slicing through the ballroom's fragile silence. "You're the one who bought Sterling Corporation." The words fell heavy, like stones dropped in a pond. The room stilled. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the orchestra faltered, bowstrings hanging in the air. Jasmine's forced smile cracked. She turned sharply toward me, panic flickering across her face. "What are you talking about, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, her voice honeyed with feigned innocence. She laughed, though the sound was brittle. "This is my mother, Eleanor. You know, the one who cleans offices." She turned to the crowd as if to remind them of the joke. "Surely you don't mean her." But no one laughed this time. All eyes were fixed on me, waiting for my answer, my defense, my collapse. I did not move. I did not speak. I had lived in silence for so long that silence had become my weapon. And in that silence, Jasmine's perfect world began to crack. Mr. Sterling's voice grew steadier now, filled with awe instead of mockery. "Miss Beaumont," he said, bowing his head slightly, "I want to thank you for saving my company, for saving the jobs of 600 families." Gasps erupted across the room. Jasmine staggered back as if struck, her painted lips parting in disbelief. "Miss Beaumont?" she echoed, her voice shrill. "No, my mother is Baines. She's nobody." But I could see it in the guests' eyes, their certainty unraveling. The poor, invisible woman they had just mocked might not be so invisible after all. And for the first time that night, I allowed myself the smallest of smiles, the kind of smile that promised, "The game has only just begun." For 20 years I had lived with this secret wrapped tightly around me like armor. To the world I was Eleanor Baines, poor, invisible, forgettable. To my daughter I was a burden, a source of shame. But to men like Mr. Sterling, behind closed doors and hidden contracts, I was E.J. Beaumont, the silent woman whose decisions could topple or save empires. And in that ballroom, the mask had slipped. Jasmine's voice cracked as she tried to reassert control. "Mr. Sterling, you must be mistaken. My mother, she cleans toilets, she wears thrift store clothes, she takes buses. Look at her, she couldn't possibly—" But her words rang hollow. The conviction in Sterling's tone had already shifted the tide. Guests who had been laughing moments ago now whispered frantically among themselves. Could it be true? Was she really Beaumont? Jasmine's eyes darted toward me, searching desperately for denial. For years I had trained myself to be silent, to let the absence of words weigh heavier than any defense. And now, I watched her drown in that silence. The orchestra had stopped playing. The waiters stood frozen with trays of champagne, too enthralled to move. Even Devon, Jasmine's new husband, shifted nervously, his hand tugging at his tie. His boyish charm seemed to wither under the realization that his new wife's cruel joke might have detonated a secret bigger than any of them imagined. "Mom." Jasmine's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp with desperation. "Tell them he's wrong. Tell them you're not Beaumont." But I said nothing. For years, I had cultivated that very doubt, keeping my life split in two. Eleanor Baines, the weary cleaning woman. E.J. Beaumont, the faceless empire builder. And now, in my daughter's glittering wedding, the lines blurred before her eyes. Her cruel smile was gone. In its place flickered something raw and ugly fear mixed with greed. If what Sterling said was true, it meant everything she believed about me was a lie. It meant the woman she had mocked her entire life might be her only lifeline. The guests leaned in closer, like moths drawn to a flame, hungry for the truth. And though my lips did not part, the silence itself became my answer. For the first time in decades, I felt a strange kind of power. Power not in what I revealed, but in what I withheld. Jasmine's world was unraveling, and I was holding the single thread. The night blurred into a tension so sharp it could have cut glass. My daughter's wedding had transformed from a celebration into a silent theater, and I was the unwilling star standing center stage. Mr. Sterling's eyes never left me. I could almost hear the frantic thoughts racing behind his calm exterior, the sale documents, the voice on the phone, the signature on contracts worth millions. In his mind, there was no doubt. He had already put the puzzle together. But for everyone else in that grand hall, it was only the beginning of suspicion. I clutched my small gift box tighter, my knuckles white, as I let the silence do what years of invisibility had taught me. It forced others to fill the void. "Is it true?" someone whispered near the back. "She can't be," another voice replied. "But Sterling just called her Beaumont," came the hushed rebuttal. The murmurs grew like a swarm of restless bees, filling every corner of the room. Devin, my new son-in-law, shifted uncomfortably beside Jasmine. His hands twitched at his cuffs, his tie pulled too tight around his neck. He had the same soft eyes as his father, but none of the experience to decipher the storm around him. He leaned toward Jasmine, his voice low, but I caught every word. "Darling, what if it's true?" Jasmine snapped her head toward him, panic flashing. "It's not. She's nothing. She's my mother, the janitor. She doesn't even have a bank account with more than a few $100s. Don't you see? This is ridiculous." But her words quivered. And I knew why. Because deep down, Jasmine had always wondered. She had seen my long nights at that tiny desk, my phone calls taken behind closed doors, the strange books and financial papers I hid among grocery receipts. She had dismissed them as quirks, remnants of a woman too poor to accept her place in life. But now, those details came rushing back, demanding to be reconsidered. I remained still, silent. Let her think. Let her remember. Let her torment herself with questions I would not answer. And while she trembled, I thought back to the years that had brought me here. Years of taking pennies saved from cleaning wages and turning them into investments. Years of hiding my growing fortune behind layers of shell companies and pseudonyms. Years of being invisible by design, because invisibility was my shield. I had studied markets while others slept. I had listened to corporate secrets while others drank champagne. And slowly, piece by piece, I built a fortune so vast it could crush or save dynasties. And all of it, every dollar, had been hidden under the mask of a poor, worn-out widow. Now, the mask was slipping. And Jasmine, the daughter who had spit venom at me in front of her glittering new world, was the first to feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her shoulders. This was only the beginning. The ballroom had turned into a stage where no one dared to breathe too loudly. All eyes clung to me as though I held a secret capable of remaking the world. In truth, I did. But power isn't only in what you reveal, it's in what you let others imagine. Mr. Sterling had already seen enough. His phone still glowed in his trembling hand, the corporate sale emails, the contract signed with E.J. Beaumont. The profile photos that matched the woman standing before him in a modest, wine-colored dress. He knew. His silence spoke volumes. But Jasmine, oh, Jasmine! Her mind was unraveling in front of everyone. She had always mocked me for being plain, invisible, small. Now, in the presence of 200 glittering guests, she was faced with the possibility that her mother, the woman she had reduced to a joke, was the very figure controlling her new family's destiny. Her voice quivered as she tried to cling to the last shred of control. "Mr. Sterling, you must be mistaken. She's nobody. She cleans buildings for a living. I told you." But her protest was drowned in whispers. The crowd no longer believed her laughter. They had seen Sterling's expression. They had felt the weight of his words when he said Miss Beaumont. I stood still, letting the silence grow, letting her panic fester. Inside, my heart thundered. I was not used to exposure. I had lived in shadows too long. But tonight, the shadows had turned into a spotlight. Jasmine turned on me, desperation flickering in her painted eyes. "Mother," she hissed under her breath, "say something. Tell them he's wrong. Tell them you're not her." I raised my eyes slowly, meeting hers. Decades of swallowed insults, of loneliness, of invisibility, all of it pulsed between us in that single look. I said nothing. The silence was a blade, sharper than any reply. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, his voice firm now, his reverence unmistakable. "This woman," he said loudly enough for every guest to hear, "is the one who saved my company. Without her, 600 families would be unemployed tonight. Without her, Sterling Corporation would not exist." Gasps swept the hall. Jasmine's face drained of color. She stumbled back a step, her hand clutching Devon's arm for balance. Devon, caught between his father and his wife, looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes. And in that moment, the mask my daughter had carefully worn for years, the mask of superiority, of disdain for her poor, invisible mother, finally cracked. What replaced it was something far uglier, a mixture of terror and greed. The air inside the ballroom had turned heavy, pressing against every chest. The guests, once loud and careless with their laughter, now clung to every word and gesture, afraid to miss what was unfolding. A wedding had become a trial, and I, the mother no one respected, was suddenly the judge they could not ignore. Jasmine's painted smile had long since melted away. Her lips trembled as her father-in-law's words replayed in her mind. "This woman saved my company." Her gaze snapped back to me. There was no longer cruelty in her eyes, only panic, as though she had been dragged into deep water and didn't know how to swim. She grabbed Devon's arm tighter, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Dad," Devon whispered hoarsely to his father. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?" Mr. Sterling didn't hesitate. "I've sat across from her on calls. I've signed papers with her name. I know who she is. Your wife's mother is E.J. Beaumont." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the chandeliers seemed to flicker under the weight of those words. Jasmine's voice broke into a desperate shriek. "No! She's lying to all of you. She's always been a liar. Look at her dress, her shoes, her hands. Does that look like the life of a millionaire?" Her outburst drew gasps, but not the kind she intended. The guests' eyes, once filled with mockery for me, now turned toward Jasmine. Her frantic denial only made her look smaller, weaker. I still hadn't spoken. And in that silence, I watched her unravel. She stepped closer to me, her voice dropping into a hiss only I could hear. "If this is true, if you are who he says, then you've lied to me my entire life. You let me think you were nothing." Her breath was sharp, her eyes wild. "Why? Why would you hide that from your own daughter?" I didn't answer. My silence was a mirror, forcing her to confront herself. She stumbled back, her face pale. Around us, whispers grew like a rising tide. "She's Beaumont. The mother of the bride? Then why has she lived like that?" Jasmine's humiliation was no longer just her cruel little game, it had turned into her undoing. And in that crowded ballroom, I realized something that chilled me as much as it thrilled me. This was only the beginning. The ballroom no longer felt like a place of celebration. It felt like an arena. Every glittering guest, every tuxedoed man and jeweled woman had turned into an audience, hungry for blood. And the whispers they cut sharper than any blade. She hid it for years. Imagine, cleaning buildings while owning companies. The daughter mocked her own mother. Did you hear what she called her? The cruel laughter from earlier had been replaced by murmurs thick with shock and curiosity. Those who had once sneered at me now craned their necks for a better look, desperate to understand how the invisible woman they had dismissed could secretly hold so much power. Jasmine stood frozen beside her new husband, her face pale, her breath quick. Devon, to his credit, tried to mask his confusion, but even he couldn't hide the tremor in his voice when he whispered, "Joss, I think your mother might be telling us more by staying silent than if she spoke." "Don't you dare say that!" Jasmine snapped, her voice cracking loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. She spun back toward me, her eyes burning. "Mother, this has gone far enough. Tell them the truth. Tell them you're not Beaumont. Tell them you're nothing like you've always been." I met her gaze calmly. For years I had been her silent wall, absorbing her words, her contempt, her shame. But tonight, silence was no longer weakness, it was my weapon. I didn't answer, and that silence broke her. Jasmine's voice rose to a scream, echoing off the marble walls. "Why won't you deny it?" The orchestra sat frozen, bows suspended over strings. Waiters stood still, their trays trembling. No one dared move. Mr. Sterling stepped forward, his voice low but firm, carrying the weight of authority. "Because she is Beaumont, and because she doesn't need to prove anything to you or anyone." Gasps rippled again. Jasmine staggered back, clutching at Devon's sleeve as though the ground itself were unsteady beneath her feet. Her painted mask of superiority, the mask she had worn her entire life, crumbled in front of everyone. And as I stood there, still holding the small box wrapped in cheap paper, I realized the roles had shifted completely. She was no longer the daughter humiliating her mother. She was the child, trembling before a truth too large to bear. And I, Ellie the Invisible, Eleanor Baines the widow, E.J. Beaumont, the empire builder, was no longer ashamed. For the first time in decades, I felt the room bend toward me. The ballroom had split itself into two worlds. On one side, the guests leaned forward like hungry spectators, their whispers curling through the air like smoke. Some gazed at me with awe, others with suspicion, but none dared laugh now. Their mocking smiles had turned into forced respect, their eyes wide as if they had just seen a ghost step out of the shadows. On the other side stood Jasmine, trembling in her wedding gown, her beauty marred by the panic twisting her features. Her hands clutched Devon's arm so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "Devon," she hissed, her voice cracking, "tell them this is insane. Tell them she could never—" But Devon didn't answer. His eyes, wide and searching, were fixed on me. Unlike Jasmine, he wasn't blinded by arrogance. He was calculating, piecing together every detail the way Mr. Sterling stared at me with reverence, the way silence itself seemed to bend the room in my favor, the way my stillness carried more weight than his wife's frantic denials. Finally, he whispered, "Jasmine, maybe we should listen." Her head whipped toward him, fury and terror mingling in her eyes. "Listen? To her? She's nothing, she's—" "Enough," Mr. Sterling's voice boomed, cutting her off. He stood tall, shoulders squared, as though reclaiming his dignity in the presence of the woman who now held his company's fate. "This woman is not nothing. She is the only reason your family name still has value tonight. Without her, Sterling Corporation would be rubble." A hush fell heavier than any silence before. Jasmine's lips trembled, her eyes darting around the ballroom, searching desperately for someone to support her, but no one stepped forward, not one. The same guests who had laughed with her minutes ago now avoided her gaze. Their loyalty shifted effortlessly, like leaves carried by the wind. I watched my daughter struggle to breathe under the weight of realization. For the first time in her life, she was the outsider, the fool, who had mocked the very person keeping her world from collapsing. My chest rose and fell slowly as I tightened my grip on the small box in my hand. The gift, once a symbol of humiliation, now felt like a weapon proof of my humility against their arrogance. And then Jasmine did something I will never forget. Her eyes, shining with both dread and greed, locked onto mine. And in a whisper sharp enough to pierce the silence, she asked, "Is it true, Mother? Are you Beaumont?" Her voice wasn't filled with love. It wasn't filled with remorse. It was filled with hunger. And in that moment, I understood. My silence was no longer just a weapon. It was a game. And Jasmine had already begun to play. The ballroom seemed to vanish into silence the instant Jasmine's words left her lips. "Are you Beaumont?" It wasn't a daughter asking her mother for the truth. It was a woman clawing for survival, her pride and greed tangled together, desperate to grasp something solid in a world crumbling beneath her jeweled shoes. 200 guests leaned closer, breaths held, eyes wide. The chandeliers gleamed above us like cold witnesses. Even the orchestra, frozen with their bows midair, waited for my answer. I looked at Jasmine, my daughter who had called me a curse in front of them all, who had mocked my hands that had worked to the bone, who had banished me to invisibility for years. Her lips trembled now, Not from shame, not from remorse, but from the unbearable temptation of wealth. For a long moment, I let the silence stretch, weaving itself into the very bones of the hall. I could feel her panic growing, her chest rising and falling too quickly, her nails digging into Devon's arm. And then I spoke. My voice was calm, almost soft, but it cut sharper than any blade. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my gaze steady, "I didn't buy your company to be recognized. I didn't do it for applause or gratitude. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My words neither confirmed nor denied, but they carried the weight of truth just enough to ignite suspicion, just enough to plant the most dangerous seed of all: doubt. Jasmine's eyes widened, relief flooding her face for a fraction of a second, thinking I had denied everything. But then she saw the way the crowd leaned in, the way Sterling bowed his head with reverence, the way Devon looked at me as though he were seeing me for the very first time. And in that instant, she realized what I had done. I had not denied. I had not confirmed. I had left her dangling in between, trapped in a torment far worse than the truth uncertainty. Her breath caught. Her whisper barely reached me, but I heard it clear as thunder. "Why would you play with me like this?" I did not answer. Instead, I allowed myself the smallest of smiles, one that spoke louder than any words could. The game had begun, and Jasmine, whether she knew it or not, had just stepped onto the board. And she would never sleep peacefully again. The ballroom's tension followed me long after the last toast was raised and the last guest drifted away. I slipped out quietly, still clutching my small gift box, leaving behind whispers and stares that would linger in every mind who had witnessed that night. For years I had lived as a shadow. That night I became a storm. In the days that followed, Jasmine's mask of confidence shattered completely. She tried to go on with her honeymoon, smiling in photographs, posing for the wealthy family she had married into. But the fear never left her eyes. The question gnawed at her relentlessly. Was my mother truly Beaumont? Her torment began with cautious messages. "Mommy, are you okay? You looked nervous at the wedding. Did you know Mr. Sterling before? Is that why he reacted like that?" When I gave her no answers, her tone sharpened. "I need you to tell me the truth about what Mr. Sterling said. Stop hiding from me, Mom. If you've lied to me my whole life, I deserve to know." I maintained my silence. My life continued exactly as it always had. Every morning at 5, I rose in my small apartment, drank black coffee, pulled on my faded uniform, and boarded 3 buses across the city. By all appearances, I was still Eleanor Baines, the invisible cleaning woman. But what Jasmine could not see was that during those rides, my other phone buzzed constantly. Behind the curtains of ordinary life, I was orchestrating operations worth hundreds of millions, directing investments across continents, signing contracts under the name E.J. Beaumont, making decisions that would ripple through entire industries. And Jasmine, with all her suspicion, couldn't prove a thing. 3 nights after the wedding, I heard footsteps fumbling with the broken lock of the building door. Minutes later, a knock at my apartment echoed through the thin walls. I opened it to find Jasmine, dressed in an ivory coat that cost more than 6 months of my rent. Her shoes clicked across the linoleum floor with disdain. She sat stiffly on my thrift store sofa, her nose wrinkling at the scent of boiled tea and the threadbare upholstery I had salvaged years ago. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, "we need to talk." Her eyes roamed my apartment with disgust, but behind the disgust was something far more dangerous: greed, sharpened by desperation. And I knew in that moment, the game was no longer confined to the ballroom. It had followed us home. Jasmine sat on my old sofa like a queen forced into exile, her elegant coat glowing like ivory against the dull, worn fabric. She crossed her legs, her manicured hands clutching her designer purse, but her eyes, they were restless, sharp, almost frantic. "I can't stop thinking about what happened at the wedding," she said, her voice quivering despite the sweetness she tried to layer over it. "The way Mr. Sterling looked at you, the way he spoke to you, it didn't make sense." I poured myself a cup of tea and sat across from her, calm as still water. "Your wedding was beautiful, Jasmine. Devon seems like a good man. That's what matters. Don't change the subject." Her composure cracked. She leaned forward, her voice lowering to a hiss. "Tell me the truth. Mr. Sterling said you were Beaumont. He said you bought his company for millions. Is it true or not?" I lifted the teacup slowly, savoring the warmth against my palms before taking a sip. Then I held out my hands toward her, my hands, rough and calloused from decades of labor, the nails short and plain. "Do these look like the hands of a millionaire, Jasmine?" My voice was soft, but the question was heavier than steel. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, with something dangerous. Suspicion, hope, greed, all tangled together. "Then explain why he called you Miss Beaumont," she pressed, her voice rising. "Explain why he looked at you like you were the most powerful person in that room." I tilted my head, allowing a thin smile to play at the corner of my lips. "Perhaps, Jasmine, Mr. Sterling mistook me for someone else. Men his age, they sometimes see ghosts where there are none. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either." And Jasmine, paranoid, desperate, hungry, filled the silence with her own imagination. Her breathing quickened. "But what if he wasn't mistaken?" she whispered, more to herself than to me. "What if you really do have money, hidden somewhere?" I said nothing, and that silence, once again, was louder than any answer I could have given. For the first time in years, I saw fear in my daughter's eyes. Not fear of losing me. Not fear of losing love. But fear that the wealth she had always worshipped might have been beside her all along, and she had spat in its face. The game was tightening its hold. The days that followed turned Jasmine into something I had never seen before. She became an investigator, though not a skilled one, a desperate one. She started showing up at odd hours, sometimes unannounced in the middle of the afternoon, sometimes late at night when the building's halls were silent except for the hum of flickering lights. Her excuses were always clumsy. "I was just in the neighborhood," or "I missed you, Mom." But her eyes betrayed her real purpose. They scanned my apartment like a predator searching for prey. Once, I caught her bent over my desk, rifling through old receipts while I cooked dinner. She jumped back when I entered, stammering something about looking for a pen, but I knew. She was hunting for evidence, for proof of a fortune she couldn't stop imagining. I made sure she found just enough to keep her restless. A deposit slip for $300 altered slightly to look suspicious. A phone number scrawled on a torn envelope, belonging to nothing more than a pizza shop. A stack of used finance books rescued from thrift stores. Harmless scraps, but to her fevered mind, they were puzzle pieces of a vast hidden empire. And then, one evening, she brought Devin with her. It was the first time he had set foot in my apartment. His polished shoes looked out of place on the worn linoleum. He tried to sit politely on the edge of the sofa, his face torn between discomfort and genuine courtesy. He was not like Jasmine. His nature was softer, honest. "Miss Baines," he began, his tone careful, "Jasmine told me about the confusion at the wedding. My father hasn't stopped talking about it. He keeps saying he knows you from somewhere important. That he's certain you're connected to the buyer of the company." Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes sharp and hungry. "So tell us, Mother, do you know this Beaumont? Is there something you've been hiding?" I folded my hands in my lap, the image of composure. "Baines is a common name," I said quietly. "If Mr. Sterling wants to meet the person who bought his company, I'm sure he can contact his lawyers. I don't see why he would trouble himself over a cleaning woman." Devin seemed reassured by my calm tone. But Jasmine's suspicion only deepened. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes gleaming with both fear and greed. And I could feel her obsession tightening around her like a noose. The more she looked, the less she found. And the less she found, the more certain she became that the truth was just beyond her grasp. Exactly where I wanted it to be. Jasmine's questions became sharper, more deliberate, as though she had spent sleepless nights rehearsing them. Every visit carried the same pattern-fake sweetness at the door, restless eyes scanning every corner, and then the inevitable interrogation. One rainy afternoon, I found her waiting on the steps outside my building. Her designer coat was soaked through, her makeup streaked in dark rivers down her cheeks. She had been sitting there for hours, clutching her purse like it held her last breath. "Mom," she whispered the moment I unlocked the door, her voice raw. "I need the truth. Devin thinks I'm losing my mind. His family looks at me like I'm crazy. But I know something isn't right. Please, tell me." I brought her inside, sat her down, and handed her a cup of hot tea. She trembled as she wrapped her hands around it. For a brief moment, She looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. But this wasn't innocence haunting her, it was obsession. "I hired a private investigator," she admitted suddenly, her eyes darting up to mine. "I needed answers. I told him to look into Beaumont." My heart skipped, though my face remained unreadable. "And?" I asked. "Nothing," she spat bitterly. "It's like she doesn't exist. Companies in 12 countries, millions moving through accounts, but no photographs, no interviews, no appearances." The detective said in 30 years, he'd never seen someone so careful. Like a ghost. Her voice cracked. "And every time I think of that, I see Mr. Sterling looking at you as if he'd seen that ghost in the flesh." She leaned forward, her eyes red, her breathing uneven. "Mom, you worked in those offices at night. You cleaned their desks, their phones, their conference rooms. You must have heard things, seen things. Did you ever—" Her voice broke. "Did you ever use those secrets?" The question hung between us like a blade. I set my cup down carefully, letting the silence stretch. "Jasmine," I said softly, "if I had truly used anything I overheard while cleaning, do you think we would have lived like this? Do you think we would have struggled all those years?" She shook her head violently, desperation spilling over. "Maybe you chose to hide it. Maybe you thought it was safer for me not to know. Maybe living poor was your disguise." Her words cut deeper than she knew. She was closer to the truth than she realized. I turned away, walking toward the window where the rain streaked against the glass like silver tears. Behind me, Jasmine's voice trembled, almost a whisper. "What if you really are Beaumont, Mom? What if you've been lying to me my whole life?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because for the first time, I felt the thin line I had drawn between truth and deception beginning to fray. And Jasmine? She was pulling harder every day. Jasmine's obsession had shifted into something darker, something unrelenting. The more silence I gave her, the more desperate she became. Each visit was shorter in patience, sharper in tone, and heavier with suspicion. One evening she stormed into my apartment without knocking, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. Devon trailed behind her, uneasy, clearly dragged into this confrontation against his will. She went straight to my bookshelf, pulling down one of the old finance manuals I had bought years ago for $1 at a garage sale. She waved it in the air like evidence in a trial. "Why do you have these, Mom?" she demanded. "Why do you, a cleaning woman, own books about corporate finance and market analysis?" I sat calmly in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. "Because they were cheap, Jasmine. Because I like to read." Her laugh was bitter, edged with hysteria. "You expect me to believe that? No. No, you've been hiding something. You've always been hiding something, and I'm going to find out what." Devon finally stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Joss, maybe we should let it go. If your mother says she isn't Beaumont, then—" "She didn't deny it," Jasmine snapped, whirling on him, her eyes wild. "Don't you see? She never denies it. She just lets me twist in the dark. Why won't you just tell me the truth, Mother?" Her voice cracked on the last word, trembling between fury and pleading. I rose from my chair slowly, walking toward her. She flinched, almost as though she expected me to strike her. Instead, I held out my hands, palms up, rough and scarred from decades of labor. "These are the only truth I've ever had to show you," I said softly. "Hands that scrubbed floors so you could eat. Hands that worked through nights so you could sleep safely. Hands that bore your shame in silence." Her chest heaved, her breath uneven. Tears welled in her eyes, but behind them still burned the flicker of greed. "Then explain," she whispered harshly. "Explain why Sterling looked at you like his life depended on it. Explain why he called you Beaumont. Explain why you've lived like a ghost." The room fell into silence, broken only by the patter of rain against the windows. Devon looked between us, torn between fear and pity. Finally, I let out a long breath, as if the weight of decades pressed against my ribs. "Perhaps," I said slowly, "there are truths too dangerous to speak aloud. Truths that, once revealed, can never be forgotten." Her eyes widened, desperate, trembling, clinging to the meaning behind my words. And I saw it then, the moment she crossed a threshold she could never return from. She no longer wanted me as her mother. She wanted me as her key. A key to money. A key to power. A key to everything she thought she deserved. And I knew, in that instant, My daughter's hunger was going to consume us both. By now, Jasmine's obsession had hardened into something relentless. She no longer tried to disguise her hunger with affection. She came to me with questions like weapons, sharpened by sleepless nights. One Friday evening, she arrived with Devin again, but this time her eyes glittered with something I had never seen before, a frantic kind of hope, edged with desperation. "Mom," she said the moment she sat down, her voice trembling, "we can't keep living like this. Devin and we're drowning. You don't understand. The debts, they're crushing us. We're on the verge of losing everything." Devin shifted uncomfortably but nodded. His honesty gave weight to her words. "It's true, Miss Baines. The house, the cars, the wedding, it was all on credit. We thought the family business would carry us through, but since the sale, things have only gotten worse." The words confirmed what I had long suspected. The glittering facade they flaunted at the wedding was built on sand. Jasmine leaned closer, her voice cracking. "If you are Beaumont or even connected to her, you could save us. Just a loan, please. We'll pay you back." Her hands reached for mine, trembling, but I pulled away. I studied her face, my daughter's face, warped by greed and fear. And in that moment, I decided it was time to test her, to push her past the edge of comfort. I stood and crossed the room, retrieving a folder I had prepared weeks earlier. Its papers were crisp, official-looking, bearing forged stamps and signatures. I placed it on the table before them with deliberate care. "This," I said evenly, "is a conditional transfer agreement. $800,000 enough to clear your debts and give you a fresh start." Jasmine's breath hitched as she snatched the papers, scanning them hungrily. Devin leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowed as he read. Her lips moved silently over the first condition, and then she read aloud, her voice trembling. "Complete transfer of all current assets as collateral." Her eyes darted up. "You mean the house, the cars, everything?" "Temporarily," I said, "until you prove you can manage responsibly." Devin's face tightened. "That would leave us entirely dependent on you. What happens if something happens to you?" Jasmine ignored him, flipping to the next line. Her voice cracked as she read, "Immediate relocation to a city of your choice. Limited family contact for 5 years." The room fell silent. Devin's face drained of color. "This is insane," he whispered. "Jas, this means cutting off everyone we know, living under her thumb. Are you really considering this?" But Jasmine's eyes were locked on the numbers. Her lips trembled, not from fear but from temptation. Finally, she read the last condition. Her voice shook. "Voluntary renunciation of all inheritance rights." She swallowed hard, looking at me with a mixture of horror and desire. "You're saying, if we accept this, we give up everything. Forever." "Exactly," I said. My tone was calm, almost cold. "This would be your one chance, your only lifeline." Devin pushed the papers away in disgust. "This isn't help. It's like buying us, Miss Baines." But Jasmine's fingers lingered on the pages, trembling with greed. "How much would the monthly stipend be?" she whispered, her eyes never leaving the ink. And in that moment, I saw the truth clearer than ever. Devin still longed for dignity, but Jasmine, my own daughter, longed only for money. Devin stood, his face flushed with anger. He looked at me as though I had betrayed him. Though we both knew the truth, I had simply revealed what already lived inside Jasmine's heart. "Miss Baines," he said firmly, his voice shaking, "this is not family help. This is punishment dressed as generosity. This is vengeance." His words pierced deeper than I expected. For years I had convinced myself my silence, my hidden empire, my detachment was all survival. But Devin was right. Part of me wanted her to suffer, to feel the sting of humiliation I had endured for decades. Jasmine clutched the papers as if they were the last raft on a sinking ship. Her tears smeared her mascara into black rivers down her cheeks. "Mom, I'll do it. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't let me lose everything. Please, please." Devin turned to her aghast. "Are you even listening to yourself? You're talking about selling your soul for money, for control, for survival!" Jasmine screamed, her voice raw and breaking. "You don't understand. My entire life I've watched her scrub floors while I pretended she didn't exist. And now she's the one with all the power. Don't you see? This is my chance to make it right. To fix everything. Her words shattered something in me. She thought this was about fixing her, but it was never about her. It was about what she had destroyed between us. I rose slowly, walked to my desk, and pulled out a different folder. My hands trembled as I opened it and laid its contents on the table. Real documents this time. Bank statements, ownership certificates, contracts signed with my hand. "I don't need conditions, Jasmine," I said quietly. "I don't need your desperation. What I need is the truth between us." Her eyes devoured the papers, widening with each page. Devon leaned closer, his face pale, and then Jasmine whispered, as if confessing to herself, "You really are, Beaumont." The room grew so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I am the woman who saved Sterling Corporation. I am the woman who built an empire worth $200 million. I am the woman you mocked, humiliated, and called a fat S in front of 200 guests, and I am also your mother." The words hung between us like fire. Jasmine collapsed into sobs, clutching the papers like holy scripture. "I'm sorry," she cried, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything I've said, everything I've done. Please don't cut me out of your life. Don't disown me." I sat back, exhaustion washing over me like a tide. "It isn't about money, Jasmine. It never was. It's about respect. And that is something you'll have to prove, not with words, but with years of change." Devon placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes meeting mine. "We'll earn it. Without your money, without shortcuts. We'll show you." Perhaps he believed it. Perhaps she did not. But as I gathered the papers back into the folder, I knew this. The truth was no longer hidden. The mask had shattered. I had revealed myself not only as Beaumont, but as a mother whose silence had finally ended. And now, the future of my family, whether built on love or destroyed by greed, lay trembling in Jasmine's hands.